And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Good morning and welcome to The Law Show here on CL 650. In studio with us today, Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kischer from Maynard, Kischer, Stojicevic, immigration and citizenship lawyers, back with us on The Law Show to talk. Oh my gosh, have we got a full hour ahead of us. Gordon and Rudy, nice to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you, Sterling.
We've had a federal election. Now, Rudy, you and Alex talked about it with me last time around. It was just seconds after the election had occurred. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to really dive into. We talked about the challenges facing the new government, but now we've had a few weeks of the new government, and we've had a few rather remarkable changes in the way the world works in the last few weeks as well. So let's start with you, Gordon. In terms of the immigration section challenges facing Justin Trudeau and his new government, they did promise us a couple of things during the election. They promised us they were going to try to bring in 25,000 refugees by the end of the calendar year, and they were going to try to make some improvements to the family class of immigrants. What's been happening on those files that you're aware of, aside from the stuff in the papers?
Well, they're still intent on bringing in 25,000 refugees, Syrian refugees.
Right.
I think the minister chooses his words carefully when he talks about the time frame. The mandate he's been given is to bring them in by Christmas. That's his challenge.
Right.
But I think he realizes that's a tough challenge. A lot of people don't believe it's going to be possible to do it.
Right.
They may get a good chunk here by Christmas, but not likely all of them. And particularly as events unfold now in the world, we're seeing reasons why the process might slow down.
Okay. And Rudy, just before we move on to the family class, in terms of refugees and the challenge, as the new Minister of Citizenship and Immigration put it, you've worked with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees abroad. So where will these people come to Canada from, Rudy?
Well, they're going to be selected. They're going to be government-sponsored refugees, which means the government's going to be responsible for where they live, supporting them in the community, which is very different from there's a private sponsorship process out there that allows families to take over that responsibility.
Right, and we've talked about that a little on the program.
And they've got to choose them as part of the resettlement process. Generally, Canada will not take people from countries where there's a possibility of them being either recognized in those countries as refugees. So they're not going to come from anywhere in Western Europe, right?
Okay,
even
sure.
in Eastern Europe. So, if someone's fled to Greece or to Germany, because there is a refugee process there, people that are there are expected to find what's called a durable solution in those countries. So it's likely that these people will be chosen from refugee camps, and there are large camps. They're set up in Turkey, and that there are people living in the general population in Jordan and in Lebanon. And my understanding is that that's where they're going to be selecting them from.
From refugee camps in Lebanon. Now, Gordon, there's a lot of being said, and I'm going to canvass your opinions on this whole security matter. For example, we've got 25,000 people, and if Rudy says they're going to be coming from camps in the Middle East, in Lebanon, for example, will those people coming out of those camps already be security screened, or is that a process that begins now that Canada says, we want you?
The security screening is going on right now.
Okay. By Canada or by some other agency?
Well, with the UN.
Okay.
With their representatives, and then we're sending over teams of personnel to assist in that process. So, the exact mechanics of it haven't been laid out yet.
Right.
But whether all of them will be fully screened before coming to Canada, I think they'll make an effort to certainly bring the ones that are fully screened.
Sure.
Whether they are pressured to bring more numbers in, they're talking about using TRPs. That's temporary resident permits.
Okay.
Temporary resident permits are permission to come into Canada when you don't otherwise meet the requirements. And so if the vetting process isn't in accordance with the statute right now or the regulations, then they can use the TRP to say, we'll take you in now and continue the process from within Canada.
Okay. Now, there's again, there's some confusion, I think, is be a good way to set it up. When we talk about people coming into Canada under a temporary resident program or some kind of temporary permit, the feeling is, and you see it in the letters to the editor all the time, Rudy, you see when a person arrives in Canada from abroad, they instantly receive or are eligible for full charter rights that a native-born Canadian would have, and therefore they're almost impossible to send away once they're here. Is there any validity to that sentiment, or is this popular paranoia?
I think it's a bit of popular paranoia. I mean, the Immigration Act really sets up good safeguards on that in terms of if somebody misrepresents, so they've lied in terms of, do they belong to a terrorist organization,
Sure, yeah.
or have they been involved in terrorist activity, or have they been to certain countries? The process is there to have them, if they've misrepresented, they can lose their permanent residency. So there's a process there for them to be removed that's fairly straightforward if what they've done is lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, there are provisions in the Act that if somebody, is a member of a terrorist organization, they can also be deported, right? Or if they've committed one of those crimes. So the thought that they're going to be involved in this sort of, I've seen it in the paper, and like once they come here, we'll never be able to get them removed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is difficult if somebody's can be challenging if somebody's a citizen already, although the Change in Citizenship Act has made that a lot easier to sort of remove people. And it's more involved if somebody's been here a long time because there's a lot more H&C considerations. But I don't think there should be this sort of paranoia that once they're here, we can't remove them.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, we've had record deportations over the last recent years.
Well, you and I, Gordon, have had a removal conversation on the Law Show in the past about all of those things that can happen that can cause a person to be brought up on some kind of charges and ordered out of the country.
Absolutely. And the charter, the past government spent a decade removing roadblocks to removals and minimizing the reviews to allow them to remove people that shouldn't be here.
Right.
So to say that the charter is going to keep people in Canada is really a misstatement. It's a political statement. It's not an honest statement.
Okay,
go
ahead, Ray.
And I think if you take a look at, the suggestion that they come in under what we call TRPs is what was done when we had thousands of people come from Bosnia, right? So they were airlifted, and talking to people that worked for UNHCR that were over there. They literally went into the camps and processed people within days, right? So they grabbed people, and they knew that they were letting them in on a temporary basis. They would come here for 2 years, and during that time, then they could apply for permanent residency if they want to stay. A lot of people actually went back once the fighting subsided. They wanted to go home to where their family was and where they were from. So
Interesting.
it was really
and we don't
think
of that part ever, do we?
Yeah, I don't think anybody sees, in fairness, in this situation, I don't think anybody sees a peace coming as quickly as it did, right? The war is far more, seems like it's going to be far more protracted with Russia being involved, right?
There's another issue, too, and Rudy made the point that these refugees are going to be selected from, let's say, camps in Lebanon. The events in Paris that have occurred have given rise to concerns that the Syrian refugee flow into Europe has been used to hide the entry of, let's say, terrorists or ISIS activists.
Yes.
We're not looking at bringing over refugees from Europe, as Rudy says.
Right.
We're looking at bringing over refugees from Lebanon, camps in Lebanon. Weeks ago when we were on this show, Rudy pointed out that those are the people that we should be looking at because they're the people who can't afford to move on to Europe.
Right.
They can't afford to find safety in Western Europe. They're stuck in camps in countries that can't afford to keep them. They're the ones most in need.
Right.
And to think that ISIS is going to put somebody into a refugee camp,
sleeper cell in Lebanon, right?
It's rather far-fetched.
Right.
ISIS is highly organized, highly wealthy. That's not the way they bring their operatives in North America.
In terms of political statements in Canada, the provinces of Ontario and Quebec have been most enthusiastic about looking forward to receiving their quotas of refugees. Here in British Columbia, Premier Clark has expressed a similar desire, but also with a security caution attached to that. Saskatchewan and its premier have written to the Minister of Immigration requesting the whole thing be put on hold because they're trying to do too much too fast and are looking for trouble. So there's a pretty interesting spectrum of political reactions with Ontario and Quebec, as they should, leading the parade in terms of the math of Canada, exhibiting the most generosity. What do you make of that, Rudy?
Well, I think economically, number one, Saskatchewan is... I think there's two things going on where you're seeing that coming from. Number one, Saskatchewan's getting very hard hit by this downturn
in commodities.
In the economy and commodities,
Absolutely,
right? So real estate prices have gone down, jobs are being lost. The thought of having to support refugees come in and integrate them in the society is going to be more of a challenging. And plus, when you look at your electorate, you take a look at Ontario, much more. My guess is you're going to find, and in Quebec, much more Syrians living there already, right?
Sure.
That are there to help support that integration. Whereas in Saskatchewan, and I don't know the stats on this, but I'm just assuming that there are far less Syrians living in Saskatchewan, people of Syrian extraction. So the thought of having to integrate them is a bigger challenge, right?
Okay.
And also, if you take a look at the background, I mean, the Premier Wall is being courted as potential leader for the Conservative Party in the next leadership race.
Exactly. Well, Gordon, I suppose as we peer across the fence to the next door neighbors, and we watch some of the reaction of some of the governors of American states absolutely refusing any refugees from the Middle East in their state, full stop. That kind of popular paranoia has morphed into hysteria down there, and I don't think that's healthy for anyone. What do you think?
There are legitimate concerns, and there are concerns that go off the rails.
Right.
And like I say, some of it's political posturing.
Oh, no question.
And
there's an election down there a year from now.
What I was thrilled with I'll say openly, I was thrilled with the change in government in the election, because I've always thought there's been too much political posturing over the last decade. That laws get made for the sake of politics, not for the sake of necessity.
Right.
I think that Prime Minister Trudeau needs to be careful. I think that world events have unfolded in a way that nobody saw.
Right.
I think promises that he made need to be reconsidered carefully. That's not to say to abandon them at all.
Right.
Not at all. But to look at them and make sure that in light of unfolding events, that you're doing the things that need to be done.
And I think the
population
population would be certainly, I think, quite understanding if the Prime Minister was to go, look, that is a little too much too fast. We need to be careful about this. We're not changing any numbers, but we're going to just allow the process to go through in 6 months instead of 6 weeks, because that's all we've got left in the year.
Sure.
So
I'm going to be fine.
Okay. Family class was spoken about during the campaign as well, Rudy. The Liberals promised, if elected, they would make improvements to family class immigrants coming into Canada. What specifically did they promise they were going to do?
Well, there's three things that they're looking at doing that come to mind. The first one is the parent and grandparent family sponsorship class. So you are able, if you're a permanent resident or a citizen in Canada and you want your mother, father, your grandparents to come live in Canada, there's a process set up where you can sponsor them.
Yeah,
so you have to make the application. That the Conservatives curtailed that program substantially. They made it much more difficult to sponsor. They made the economic requirements far harder to meet them, and they reduced the number of people that were allowed to come in under that category, to the point now that if you were to file a sponsorship application today for your parents or your grandparents,
and you do this all the time
we
at
do
the
this
office,
quite
don't
a bit.
you?
People
Sure.
come in and they're shocked to hear, because when I started, if we say 15 years ago, this process took maybe a year or 2 years.
To bring a family member in.
To
bring a parent
or grandparent.
Okay.
2 years. That
Okay.
sounds like a reasonable time frame. I think everybody can live with it. And that's kind of what people, I think, still expect when they come in.
So
Maybe
what's
it's
it up
gonna
to now, Rudy?
It's over 10 years.
Good grief. Really?
It is over 10 years. Now, they
In fact,
haven't...
you can't even submit an application right
Yeah,
now.
you can't even submit it. So, and what the Conservatives did 2 years ago was they put a freeze on the number, or 4 years ago, they put a freeze on accepting applications at all, so that they closed the class, and then they reopened it to a limited opening for the last 2 years, where they only take 5,000 applications. So when they did that 2 years ago, that category filled up. The accepting new applications under that category was filled in about 3 weeks. Last year, it filled up, and from my understanding, in the first day.
Wow.
So, and they only take 5,000 applications. The Liberals have committed, and we've seen the marching orders that have been given by Trudeau.
Oh, the letters to the ministers, right? Exactly.
The mandate letter. So the mandate letter from Prime Minister Trudeau to the Minister of Immigration is that they are to double those numbers, so that they're going to take 10,000 this year at the opening, which I imagine will be the same time. So January 2nd will be the opening, and so they'll take twice, which means, if you think about it, it'll probably fill up in 2 days.
Still probably fill up in 1 day.
Yeah. So the backlog is going to be massive,
right,
in terms of people interest. But what they haven't done is saying we're going to immigrate more parents and grandparents. So what they haven't told everybody on this, and I think it's a bit of either not time to sort of play with it, is that they haven't gone to people and say, okay, we're going to let you apply, but you're probably going to be waiting now 15 years to get here because more people are applying at the same time.
Oh, so there's no corresponding consideration for increasing staff size to accommodate the increased volume?
It's never a matter of increased staff size. It's a number. What we have is a set. If you look at it as seats on a plane, we only take 280,000 people every year.
Right.
If we're taking more grandparents, who are we not taking?
Okay.
And that's what the Liberal government hasn't talked about. Who are we not taking? Right.
No, but you're right. The processing time, there's no commitment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although we did give marching orders to the minister to generally look at all processing times for visas of all sorts and to, I don't know what, slap himself on the head and say, boy, that's a long time. But,
To go, oh my gosh, we better do something.
yeah, but it's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about this in the next session. But when you talk about bringing in refugees, when you talk about bringing in more parents, as Rudy says, there's an immigration plan tabled every year as to how many immigrants you're bringing in.
Right.
And it's divided up into economic and non-economic classes. When you increase the numbers of refugees and parents, you're increasing the non-economic immigrants. Now the question is, are you adding these numbers to the existing
to increasing
levels,
the totals, or
are
somebody
you
going to lose?
robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Exactly.
That's a very important question.
It is a very good question, and we'll touch on that, and also temporary foreign workers. When we return, it's the Law Show on CIL 650. Our guests are Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kischer from Maynard, Kischer, Stojicevic, immigration and citizenship lawyers in Vancouver at 1168 Hamilton Street downtown. And we're back with lots more on the Law Show right after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.